please welcome to the stage Laurence Buchanan, the EMEIA Advisory Digital Leader at EY.
So good morning, everyone. My name's Laurence Buchanan. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was working in one of the industry sectors that was really, at the time, in the eye of the storm of digital disruption. The sector was the telco media sector, and my client was a cable TV company. They suddenly realized that the world had changed, that their competitor set was no longer traditional cable TV telco companies. Suddenly, they were competing against American tech vendors, e-commerce vendors, retailers that had entered the space with over-the-top services. Now, our conversations quickly turned to how should we respond? Do we try and transform today's business to be fit for purpose in a digital world, or do we set up a new one? What we decided to do in the end, for reasons of speed and cost, was to set up a brand new business, completely free from the legacy, new brand, new operations, new business model. Now, 8 years later, that's been relatively successful. That's scaled out across Europe now. But actually, we knew at the time this was going to lead to some really difficult, challenging questions. How do you both create a new business in a digital world and transform your existing legacy business? How do you take innovation from one part of the organization or from your digital innovation lab and really start to scale and industrialize it across the main business? How do you cope with coexistence, in effect, as we all transition into the digital world? Now, fast forward 7 or 8 years to today, and suddenly this topic of digital transformation is no longer something just for what I'd describe as the post-disrupted industries. Industries like telco, media, retail, where in most cases the core product, the distribution model, the supply chain has been digitized. Today, digital transformation is hitting every single industry sector, every single company of every shape and size. Recently, we completed a survey and did some research of about 1,000 executives across 20 different industry sectors. What was interesting in that research is 87% of people thought that their industry would experience either moderate or, in the case of 38%, complete disruption within 2 years. What's interesting, if you look at the industry sectors, is almost all of them, the top of the list, are what I describe the pre-disrupted industries. Industries like automotive, healthcare, life sciences, power and utilities, where the digital megatrend really to date has not rewritten the fundamentals of the business and the value chain. Now, if you think about two industries in particular that we're really excited about, that I think bring some of these changes really to life, there's two I'd probably call out. The first is the automotive sector. I think it's inconceivable that in the future, be that 3, 5, 10, 15 years away, it's inconceivable that the business model of an OEM will be to sell metal boxes on wheels through dealerships to consumers to drive around towns and cities. Most OEMs are today exploring what's the future of mobility going to look like. Some have started to make acquisitions. Ford acquired Chariot as a ride-sharing service. Some are exploring, could they rent fleets of autonomous driving vehicles to cities under car-sharing schemes? What's fascinating is disruption in one sector is then bleeding into several others. You can't think about the changes in automotive without the ripple-on consequences into the rail industry, into freight and logistics, into cities, as you've just heard from the last panel. Cities will have to upgrade their infrastructure and become smart and connected. Into telco, where the 5G network will power autonomous driving vehicles. Into insurance, where suddenly we have to think, well, if every car is autonomous, who's liable if a car crashes? Is it the driver who's not actually driving, the OEM that built the equipment, the telco company whose network might go down? Suddenly, there are huge ripple-on consequences into every single industry sector. The other one I'd maybe call out is healthcare and life sciences. And I'm really passionate about this sector. It's one I spend a lot of my time in. Today, we talk about big data. I think in a few years' time, we're going to look back and actually laugh at how small our data sets are. We're basing healthcare decisions sometimes on tiny data sets and of the opinions of the medical provider that we're seeing. Now imagine a world in which, with the right levels of consent, privacy and trust, I'll caveat with that, imagine a world where all of our genomes are sequenced. Today it's only about 0.00001% of the population has had their genome sequenced. Where all of our activity data, not just our 10,000 steps, but our fitness, our blood pressure, our blood glucose levels, the stress levels we're experiencing every single second of the day. Imagine if all of that data is digitized, combined, and then aggregated so that we can start to compare trends globally across all the entire world. Suddenly at that stage, we're talking about data sets that are so vast that actually we have nothing like enough computing power in the world to analyze the data. Hence the promise of something like quantum computing to start to solve for the first time really significant challenges like how do we find a cure for cancer? How do we prevent it in the first place by analyzing all of these vast quantities of data and information? Now, it's very easy to talk about intent and say 90% of clients in our survey said they were prioritizing capital allocation towards digital transformation. Because in all industries, I think the why is now not being questioned. Companies know that technology is fundamentally rewriting the economics and the value chain of their industries, and they're responding. The challenge, though, is I think companies are falling into very, very different categories in how they are responding. I tend to see two big differences, two different categories. The first is companies that I would describe as doing digital. In effect, they are digitizing the front end of yesterday's business. I met recently with the global chief digital officer at a Fortune 500 company. I asked, any idea what you're currently spending on digital across the company? He said, I've no idea, but what I do know is we have contracts in place with 200 different digital interactive and media agencies who between them have built us 10,000 websites, 750 mobile apps. We're on at least 300 different social networking accounts. We have a digital lab that has all of the characteristics of a Silicon Valley tech company. We have beanbags, pool tables, scrum boards, posters on the wall that say, think big, fail fast. The only challenge is we've not produced anything meaningful in 3 years. Nothing has gone beyond MVP stage. Now, the challenge is a company like that is, and I'm conservatively estimating, spending $100 million per year on digital. Yet, they're having zero impact. They are not reinventing the business model, the operating model, The culture of the business is still driven by the org chart that was probably built 50 years ago. The technology of the business is driven by the ERP system that was put in place in the 1990s. It takes 6 months to make a change in pricing, let alone thinking about dynamic pricing online. So this is a company that is doing digital, but they are not in any way securing their future as a digital business. On the flip side, I see companies really trying to reinvent the whole and become a digital business. I spent a little bit of time working for Burberry early in their transformation journey under Angela Ahrendts. She was on a mission to digitize every single aspect of Burberry and actually eradicate the term digital because the whole business was digital. Her real drivers were to think about the new business model, the customer proposition and experience, and then making sure that every single aspect of the business was aligned and automated and driven by data to support the evolution of the customer experience. That was a company, I think, that was trying to be digital, not do digital. I think this raises a real challenge for the board, because at board level you can say, well, we're allocating capital towards digital transformation, but are we spending money on the right things? There's a fairly famous rule of thumb within a digital program that you should spend 70% of your resources on sustaining today's business, driving cost out, automation, channel shift to digital channels, 20% on driving incremental growth, 10% on disruptive innovation. Now, I don't mind that as a starting point, as long as it has the very big caveat that has to be unique to every company, and it has to depend on the level of disruption, the pace within every single sector. If you were a newspaper company 10 years ago, and all you did was digitize to sustain today's business, the chances are you probably wouldn't be in business today. So I think the portfolio has got to change for every single company. Now, thinking about what you do, how do companies actually get digital transformation right? To me, the first challenge is just recognizing the holistic impact of the technology megatrend. Today we see technologies combining and colliding at an astonishing pace, and from a whole variety of different sources. You can't think of them individually. The Internet of Things is creating the data that's fueling AI that in turn is driving our ability to automate. And that cycle will spin faster and faster and faster. The combinations of those technologies will create, on one hand, profound opportunity. The opportunity to completely reinvent a business model, to drive cost out of your operations, to engage with your customers, your employees, your partners in entirely new ways, capturing vast amounts of data that give you insight into the company. On the other hand, I'd argue that digital creates, for most organizations that were born before the technology revolution, digital creates an existential crisis that frankly will bring the company down. At simply today's rate of churn, 75% of the S&P 500 companies will be new companies by 2027. They will be displaced by startups that don't even exist today. If you think about some of the real challenges that digital is creating today, challenges around cyber, every single connected device, which now stretch way outside the sphere of one organization, is a potential entry point. Recently, an automotive company introduced in-car diagnostics for their service technicians. A third-party software company with no relationship to the OEM built an app for pay-as-you-drive insurance. Through the app, hackers could hack into the car and apply the brakes while someone was driving. So suddenly something that you have no control over whatsoever inside the walls of your company is the weakest connected part of your enterprise that can drive a catastrophic cyber event. Similarly, you think about the wastage that we're starting to see in digital. Unilever's CMO, Keith Weed, recently estimated that something like 29% of all of their global web traffic, all of their likes, their reviews, their clicks, was fake, driven by click farms and bots. There's a huge challenge there for a company that's spending tens, perhaps hundreds of millions on digital advertising. There's a trust issue there. So I think the first thing is to recognize this balance of opportunity and threat that digital creates. The second, to me, is to recognize the holistic impact of digital. 7 years ago, when I was working in that cable TV company, we had the time to do both. We could set up a new business on the side whilst at the same time slowly transforming the main company. Today, I don't think companies have time anymore. The pace of change has gone out of control, even of the tech giants. And unfortunately, digital is impacting every single aspect of the enterprise, from its business model to its customer proposition, experience, the marketing, sales, service functions, the supply chain function, even the back office, legal, risk, finance functions, as every single tax, legal, and regulatory regime around the world tries to play catch up with the digital economy. The third thing I think companies should be doing is really thinking about digital as a continuum. Digital transformation is not a project. It's an ongoing way of being. This is a model that we use with our clients. I won't talk through every component, but there's four main sections of the model. The first in the yellow we call the engine room. And it's there firstly to set the overall vision, purpose, ambition level for the company. You don't need a digital strategy. You need a business strategy that's fit for purpose in a digital world. And the engine room is to ensure that's in place. Because if that's not in place, there's no context which we can look to use technology within. The engine room sets the portfolio of initiatives and then orchestrates their execution. Outside that, you have this continuous cycle of disrupting, innovating like a startup. Typically, that needs some freedom to operate. Applying a design thinking process to take the sparks of new ideas, center them in the wants and needs of your customers, take them to MVP as soon as you possibly can and get them into hands of users so you get real feedback. At that stage, many digital programs have failed. They fail fast, they don't scale fast. To me, the entire battleground is failure is fine, but it's simply a learning exercise that improves your ability to scale. The deployment hub in green is all about driving industrialization and scale. We have now a semi-proven concept. What do we need to do to scale it? How much capital do we need to raise? Should we build it all ourselves, or should we joint venture? Should we buy? Should we set up a new company or transform the old one? What are the implications of that to our operating model, to the way we have to think about legal, tax, compliance? All of these things stop scale. In order to drive that, I think you need two things. I think you need, firstly, some external perspectives. Companies like Starbucks were probably the first to do this. They put in place a digital board member very, very early on, but someone that could guide the board through some of this change. Now companies in every sector I see trying to hire, mining companies, for example, trying to hire AI experts and software engineers. On its own, though, that's not enough. My belief is digital needs diversity. I've seen lots and lots of different digital initiatives at MVP stage that go back to the business and are rejected because the lawyers say, hang on, you haven't thought through the data privacy consequences. You haven't thought about this regulatory change, this tax implication to the rest of our business. Digital initiatives just stop when they hit the main business. So I think what you really need is diversity, clashing together very, very different skills and perspectives into short sprint teams. I wanted to end with just a couple of examples of people doing this. So the first, one of our clients in the Americas is Royal Caribbean. The cruise ship industry is undergoing huge amounts of change like any other. We've worked with Royal Caribbean to set up a digital innovation factory in Miami. Every couple of weeks they go through a new design sprint trying to reinvent a new customer experience on the ship, whether that's the researching your holiday experience, the buying food experience, the retail experience. Technology can change all of those things. Although a couple of completely unique challenges. The cruise ship is offline for large chunks of time because it's in the middle of the ocean. As it travels around and you're trying to drive a retail experience, you hit different customs and excise laws. So Royal Caribbean, I think, do a brilliant job of driving the continuum of change, constantly exploring new opportunities. The second is a client I hope all of you know, and I hope all of you watched the brilliant British and Irish Lions tour last summer. The British and Irish Lions would now think of technology impacting across the business in many different areas. In player performance, obviously they use the live GPS data in the coaching box. For their fan experience, they've done an amazing job of engaging on social media, of building digital products for their consumers and fans. And in the last Lions tour, you could get the almost live performance data of all the players, select your fantasy teams, compete against your friends. That also created commercial opportunities. They could work with their sponsors to unlock new sources of value. So one of their sponsors, Qantas, for example, collaborated to create an online competition based on the Lions' digital applications. And the final thing that we did for the Lions was set up an analytics and cyber command center, live tracking all of the performance data, looking at the threat intelligence so that they could identify and prevent, for example, illegal streams on the dark web, usernames and passwords of staff and players on the dark web. So that's another business that much, much smaller than Royal Caribbean, but where technology actually is making a huge impact up and down the value chain. So that's it from my side. I think the key question that I'm trying to raise, I suppose, is for every company is one of duality. It's how do you embrace disruption and be both the disruptor and also the disrupted? How can you reimagine a business whilst at the same time transforming a business? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.